After transforming into an omega, I found myself marked by an alpha and, to my astonishment, pregnant. Yet, I am a man. Filled with both trepidation and disbelief, I approached him with a pregnancy test in hand, only to be met with his disdainful expression. Stealing sperm will land you in jail. Subsequently, I married him out of necessity, hoping to secure enough money to escape, but the alpha blocked my path, pleading for me not to leave. I pointed at him and instructed my son, "Darling, call him uncle." The alpha was taken aback. "Did you not say the child is mine? Why then, should he call me uncle?" 01 that I sat awkwardly in the conference room, tightly gripping a pregnancy test. The alpha before me scrutinized me from a lofty position, a hint of a cold smile dancing on his lips before he finally let out a derisive laugh. Upon witnessing his reaction, I hastily handed him the pregnancy test. "Here it is, I have only been with you, so the child must be yours." In the midst of an inexplicable tension, the alpha approached and slightly bent down to touch my belly. At merely 2 months along, there was nothing to discern. My anxiety heightened as I clutched the leather seat. The alpha's voice was uncomfortably close. "Stealing sperm will land you in jail, do you understand?" I blinked in surprise and met his cold gaze. "I have no idea whose seed is in your belly in any case. Get out of here." Did I widen my eyes in disbelief? Was he truly denying responsibility after causing my pregnancy? I sprawled on the sofa, adopting a petulant demeanor. "No, I will not leave." As if taken aback by my audacity, the alpha's expression momentarily froze. He reached for his phone, seemingly intending to summon security, but it rang before he could make the call. Upon answering, a loud voice boomed from the other end. "Son, you mentioned you found a partner. Are you bringing them home for dinner tonight?" The alpha responded somewhat dismissively, "I've been busy lately, let's discuss it later." My eyes lit up from his demeanor. I could infer that he was likely lying and had no partner at all. Moreover, he appeared to be under pressure to marry. In a swift motion, I dashed over and leaned close to the phone, adopting a higher pitch as I exclaimed, "Honey, who are you talking to?" The alpha holding the phone turned to stone. Half an hour later, I found myself seated in the alpha's Maybach. His name was Gu Huai. 2 months prior, during his sensitive period, he encountered me in my heat phase, and we ended up entangled in bed without much thought. At that time, I had only just traversed into this peculiar ABO world, initially believing I had merely been bitten, unaware that men could also conceive in this realm. Now, the most pressing matter was to secure sufficient funds to support both myself, a newcomer to this strange world, and the life growing within me. 02. My arrival was met with an exuberant welcome, a table laden with exquisite dishes I had never encountered before, and I indulged heartily. Midway through the feast, I heard Madame Gu reproachfully address Gu Huai. "Why haven't you ensured that little Ruan is well fed? Look how famished the child is." No sooner had she spoken than, overwhelmed by my gluttony, I experienced a bout of dry heaving. Madame Gu's expression shifted, and she tentatively inquired, "Little Ruan, is something the matter?" I decided to speak candidly. "Auntie, I am pregnant, and it is Gu Huai's child." In a flurry, Madame Gu ascended the stairs, returning shortly with a red envelope and a jewelry box in hand. I left with a bounty, having also set a date for the wedding. On the way home, Gu Huai wore a perpetual frown while I merrily hummed a tune, counting my money. Eventually, unable to contain his irritation, Gu Huai pulled over the car and, with a warning tone, stated, "Ruan Lu, if the child is not mine, I will personally see you incarcerated." The prospect of imprisonment aside, I soon moved into Gu Huai's villa, placing my meager collection of 2 garments into his wardrobe. The wedding was hastily arranged, yet every aspect was meticulously attended to as Gu Huai and I exchanged rings. On our wedding night, he retreated to the guest room and we separated. I sat on the bed, repeatedly counting the money I had acquired through marriage, and eventually drifted into a contented slumber. The following morning, I sat at the dining table, feasting heartily. Gu Huai descended the stairs, halting momentarily to cast a disdainful glance my way, as if sharing a meal with me was beneath him, and he seated himself at a distance. After breakfast, he avoided eye contact and left abruptly. His demeanor filled me with unease. Should he decide to cast me out one day, reclaiming the money he had given me, I would be left to wander once more. This was unacceptable. I resolved to earn my own livelihood. 03. In the 2 months since my arrival in this world, I had discerned its intricacies. I recalled how, upon my initial transition, I was utterly bewildered and, in a moment of passion, failed to exercise restraint, which led to my muddled situation with Gu Huai. Thus, I opened a specialty store. This establishment operated covertly, and whenever I found myself with idle time at home, I would whimsically visit my shop. Before I even reached the premises, I noticed a group of individuals shouting aggressively at the counter, as if intent on vandalizing the place. The shop attendant, a young woman, appeared on the verge of tears. Sensing trouble, I hurried over. As I approached the entrance, the men abruptly turned to face me, their eyes gleaming with malice. One of them spoke, "You've released your pheromones? Are you looking to play with us?" Taken aback, I instinctively covered the back of my neck, realizing that one corner of the pheromone patch I had applied before leaving was not securely affixed. A few wisps of pheromones wafted toward me, and I felt a wave of weakness wash over my legs, rendering me unable to flee. They advanced toward me, and the young girl behind the counter, sensing the danger, attempted to call the police, but her efforts were thwarted as her phone was smashed before she could complete the call. The atmosphere in the store grew increasingly suffocating with the overpowering scent of pheromones, making me feel nauseous as I leaned against the door for support. I glanced outside, hoping a passerby might notice the disturbance and come to our aid. A twinge of pain gripped my abdomen. I feared for the safety of my child. Resolute, I attempted to step outside. At that moment, several bodyguards suddenly burst onto the scene, swiftly incapacitating the assailants. Stunned, I remained frozen, unsure if my dizziness stemmed from fear or exhaustion, before succumbing to unconsciousness. In my hazy state, I seemed to catch a faint whiff of refreshing, post-rain air. It bore the scent of Gu Huai's pheromones. 04. I awoke in a hospital, my eyes fluttering open to find Gu Huai seated by my bedside. He held my hand, his expression laden with concern. Blinking in confusion, I noticed he seemed to realize I was awake, pausing for a moment before releasing my hand. His words were somewhat brusque. "Is the money I gave you insufficient? Why do you feel the need to open a store?" His tone was somewhat harsh. After a moment of contemplation, I retorted dryly, "You yourself said you would throw me out, so am I not allowed to earn a little for myself?" Gu Huai regarded me intently, inhaling deeply before conceding. "I can provide you with anything you desire, but from now on, please try to accompany me whenever you go out, all right?" I muttered under my breath, "You're so busy. When would you have the time?" Gu Huai, unable to hear my words clearly, asked for clarification, but I feigned ignorance. After the discharge procedures were completed, the doctor reiterated the importance of avoiding all individuals aside from Gu Huai, as I was now experiencing adverse reactions to them. I understood that Gu Huai would likely not allow me to venture out again, so I nodded in acquiescence. Unexpectedly, Gu Huai chastised me, glaring as he demanded my promise to refrain from wandering off again. I had never experienced such humiliation. Instinctively, I snapped back, "It is you who forbids me from going out. Do you expect me to remain cooped up in your house for 10 months? The more I spoke, the more aggrieved I became. I had only been in this world for 3 months, had become a stranger who could not speak, and was now pregnant with a child belonging to someone I barely knew. Yet the child's father was scolding me. My voice trembled with emotion as I confessed, "I don't want this. I'm scared too." It was my first confrontation with the stark reality of our disparity. Their mere release of pheromones rendered me powerless. Gu Huai, perhaps taken aback by my raw vulnerability, initially froze before hastily dabbing at the corners of my eyes, seemingly flustered. I hadn't even shed tears. My eyes merely appeared slightly reddened. "All right, don't cry," Gu Huai spoke in a soothing tone. "I harbor no blame toward you. From now on, I will take you with me whenever I go out, all right?" He, the scoundrel, uttered these words while attempting to embrace me. It was laughable. I had no desire for his embrace. I pushed him away and stepped into the car ahead of him. 05. Following this incident, Gu Huai ensured I accompanied him to work each day. Occasionally, while he attended meetings, I would nap in his lounge. Drawn by the allure of pheromones, I often found myself snuggling into his embrace as I drifted off. Recently, I had been feeling particularly drowsy. Upon awakening and rubbing my eyes, I would venture outside, inadvertently interrupting conversations taking place in the living room. Upon noticing me, Gu Huai glanced up, and I realized I had intruded upon their discussion. I hastily retreated back to the lounge. The door was not entirely shut, allowing me to overhear snippets of their conversation. Gu Huai's companion excitedly queried, "Bro, who was that just now? Is he your boyfriend?" After a brief pause, Gu Huai replied, "No." "Then can you introduce him to me? He looks adorable." I hid in the lounge, my eyes widening in surprise as I found myself anticipating Gu Huai's response. However, he coolly responded, "He is already pregnant, Zhao Ran." So that was the name of the individual, Zhao Ran. Zhao Ran then asked, "Bro, you're not the father, are you?" Gu Huai hesitated momentarily before denying, "The child is not mine." Zhao Ran, appearing unconcerned, remarked, "Well, that's good. Bro, you should introduce him to me." Our pheromone compatibility is at least 80%. I was taken aback. Did Zhao Ran genuinely relish the idea of being an unexpected father? The atmosphere outside seemed to freeze as Zhao Ran urged, "Bro, say something." Gu Huai inhaled deeply and coldly commanded, "Leave." Zhao Ran was swiftly dismissed. I quickly retreated to the bed in the lounge, only to hear footsteps approaching. The door swung open, revealing Gu Huai standing at the threshold. His expression dark as he fixed his gaze upon me, murmuring almost to himself, "How do you manage to entice others so effortlessly?" I was not. It was Zhao Ran who was being overly sentimental. Gu Huai possessed remarkable strength. He grasped my face, his pheromones emanating fervently, rendering my legs weak. His voice, tantalizingly close, inquired, "So, do you wish to remarry?" I shook my head vigorously. Gu Huai's thighs were exceedingly comforting to embrace, and he was affluent. Only a fool would consider remarriage. It seemed he was quite pleased, as he tilted his head down and captured my lips in a kiss. Caught off guard by his sudden advance, I felt a rush of emotions. One hand pressed against the back of my head. He drew in my breath, leaving me gasping for air, compelling me to cling tightly to him. In a haze, I found myself being kissed, while Gu Huai tenderly referred to me as baby. He even caressed my belly, expressing his joy at the prospect of becoming a father. His swift change in demeanor left me bewildered, and then he gently kissed my earlobe, soothingly murmuring, "I love you so much." I recalled how he had constantly refused to acknowledge the child within me as his own and, feeling a surge of frustration, I asked, "Didn't you refuse to recognize this child?" Gu Huai leaned in to kiss me again, sincerely declaring, "I do recognize it." What a scoundrel! It was only when he desired to kiss me that he chose to acknowledge it. Without a second thought, I kicked him. However, in the end, my efforts felt futile. Gu Huai remained unfazed, while I, having struck his solid muscle, felt as if I had kicked a block of iron. The pain made me retract my foot, grinding my teeth in anger. Gu Huai deftly seized my foot, massaging it while soothingly saying, "It doesn't hurt anymore." It was futile to reason with him. In irritation, I turned away. "Don't touch me." Gu Huai withdrew his hand. He sat at the edge of my bed, his pheromones enveloping me like an insistent tide, sweat glistening on his forehead, his body radiating heat. This state reminded me of that chaotic night, eerily reminiscent of the present. I cast a dubious glance at Gu Huai. "Are you in your sensitive period?" He nodded slightly, attempting to draw closer to embrace me, but I evaded him. The first time had been an accident. I had no intention of helping him resolve it. I pointed toward the door. "Go and take the suppressant yourself." Gu Huai appeared rather pitiable, a large figure standing by the bed, unwilling to move. Suddenly inspired, I beckoned him with my finger, and Gu Huai eagerly approached the bed, yearning to touch me. Seizing the opportunity while he was still somewhat dazed, I grasped his hand and placed it on my belly, insinuating, "I'm pregnant with your child. You owe me money to raise it." In his sensitive state, Gu Huai was particularly easy to persuade. Not only did he provide me with a check, but he also drafted a guarantee, assuring me that this money was a voluntary gift, irrevocable even in the event of our future divorce. Elated, I held the check, grinning from ear to ear. The following morning, I was abruptly awakened from my slumber by Gu Huai's stern demeanor, accusing me of shamelessness. I retorted, "It was you who clung to me yesterday." Gu Huai remained impassive, calmly stating, "That's impossible. I don't recall engaging in such behavior. Think carefully before you slander me." I was taken aback. Could it be that he would forget by the next day? In both encounters, he had no recollection whatsoever. I pulled out my phone to search, and the majority of online responses indicated that such occurrences were indeed common. Many individuals experience drastic personality shifts after their sensitive periods, completely unaware of what had transpired. I decided to temporarily forgive Gu Huai due to the check from the previous night. As I pondered this, Gu Huai pointed towards the door, urging me to leave and not obstruct his view. I was more than eager to take the check and depart, even though my legs trembled slightly as I walked. Limping, I made my way out, while Gu Huai sat behind his desk, seemingly at a loss for words. The moment I opened the office door, Gu Huai stood up. Perhaps feeling embarrassed for me, he draped his suit over me, lifting me in his arms and transporting me from the President's exclusive elevator to the parking lot without allowing anyone to witness. From that day forward, Gu Huai ceased returning home, often staying out overnight, and our encounters became infrequent. Though he didn't come home, he would accompany me to the hospital, making an effort to be a decent father, albeit with my estranged father. Yet, these fleeting moments of companionship were far from sufficient. Prior to my arrival in this world, I had harbored no concept of men bearing children, and as time passed, my fear only grew. Unable to contain it any longer, one day I dialed Gu Huai's number. Cocooned beneath my blankets, I called his name in a voice laced with nasal tones, asking if he could come and keep me company. Gu Huai was the first person I had met upon entering this world. Instinctively, I sought him in times of need. On the other end of the line, Gu Huai seemed inclined to decline, yet ultimately, swayed by my pleas, he returned home. His pheromones wrapped around me gently as I clutched his shirt, falling into a deep slumber. Afterward, Gu Huai began returning home. Each night, he would stay by my side, releasing pheromones to soothe me. We reached an understanding, and he visited me daily until the child was born. The little one inherited my pheromones, a sweet peach fragrance. 3 months after the birth of the child, I proposed a paternity test, which Gu Huai refused, seemingly empathetic as he remarked, "Although the child is not mine, I can reluctantly raise him as my own." To be candid, I was somewhat incensed, leading to a heated argument where I lashed out at him. "Could it be that you are indiscriminate, hence forgetting our encounter?" Gu Huai looked at me with a hint of exasperation, stating, "Aside from the last time in my lounge, I have never been intimate with you. Are all domineering CEOs afflicted with memory loss, unable to recall even this?" I had already received a substantial sum of money. I did not wish for my child to have a father who did not love him, so I filed for divorce. Gu Huai was taken aback by my decisiveness, his expression a rare mix of shock as he cautioned, "You better think this through." I was resolute and firmly insisted on the divorce. The process, however, was not smooth, as Gu Huai was reluctant to sign. He proposed, "Though Ruanqi is not my child, I will genuinely raise him as my son. He will have everything others do, and I will treat him well." Fuming, I waved my son's tiny hand at Gu Huai, softly stating, "Baby, tell uncle that we don't need his charity." Gu Huai's expression soured. He looked at me, frustrated, stating, "Didn't you say he is my son? Why now refer to me as uncle?" I shrugged. "Since you refuse to acknowledge it, why should he call you daddy?" Gu Huai, feeling constrained, replied, "I can recognize him." "Forget it," I rejected. Once again, our discussion ended on a sour note. Despite the difficulties under my persistent persuasion, Gu Huai ultimately consented to the divorce. Holding a pen in hand, he took a deep breath before signing, as if attempting to retain me, and asked, "Do you really have to divorce?" I nodded. It must be done. The marriage certificate transformed into a divorce decree, and I received a considerable amount in child support. I left the Gu family with my child and named him Ruanqi. I purchased a spacious flat, hired a nanny, and with the income from my supply store, I ensured a comfortable life for both myself and Ruanqi. Encountering Zhao Ran was unexpected. That day, I was strolling with Ruanqi when a stranger approached, startling my child into tears. The stranger appeared somewhat flustered, bending down to console Ruanqi, but the more he tried, the louder Ruanqi cried. It was at that moment Zhao Ran appeared, first ushering away the well-meaning stranger and then successfully calming the crying child. Despite being a stranger himself, he exuded a certain charm. He flashed me a smile and persistently inquired about the identity of my child as father. Upon learning I was divorced, he expressed surprise and offered to take on the role of a caretaker. Unable to resist, I asked him, "Do you have a particular affinity for divorced women with children?" He maintained his smile and said, "No, I simply have a fondness for you." It was utterly terrifying, and I hurriedly left with Ruanqi. There were no sane individuals in Gu Huai's household, and his cousin was no exception. From that day forth, Zhao Ran inexplicably began to appear, and to my dismay, Ruanqi seemed rather fond of him, willingly allowing him to draw near. Each time, he would inquire about my intentions regarding marriage, and I, overwhelmed by his persistence, sent a message to Gu Huai. This marked our first contact since the divorce. In my text, I expressed my distress and requested that he rein in his cousin. After a considerable delay, Gu Huai replied, assuring me that he would handle the matter. Following that message, Zhao Ran indeed disappeared for quite some time, but it was merely 2 weeks. In the 3rd week he returned. He dashed towards me with excitement, his eyes sparkling with joy. I finally managed to shake off my cousin's bodyguard. Is he insane for not letting me pursue someone I like? My expression darkened, and just as I contemplated messaging Gu Huai, a familiar scent that I longed for wafted around me. My heart raced, and as I scanned the surroundings, I spotted a familiar figure approaching. It was Gu Huai. I stood there, transfixed. Perhaps it had been too long since we last met, and I yearned to inhale his scent. I found myself unable to restrain my impulse and took a step toward him. How pitiful it was that just a short separation made me crave him uncontrollably. I hurried toward Gu Huai, desperately longing for his essence, and without thinking, I threw myself into his embrace. He seemed momentarily taken aback, but he caught me, and I nestled against him. I murmured softly, the scent. I couldn't fathom why I felt this way about him. During our time apart, I had trouble sleeping, constantly dreaming of him. While I could manage the distance, seeing him again proved unbearable. I stood on tiptoe to reach the nape of his neck, wishing to remove his scent gland sticker, but everything went dark. Before I lost consciousness, I glimpsed the look of confusion and helplessness on Gu Huai's face, along with Zhao Ran rushing toward me from a distance. 08. Once again, I awoke in a hospital. Since my arrival in this world, being hospitalized had become an all too frequent occurrence. I lay in bed, my spirits quite low, yet I still faintly craved Gu Huai's scent. The sound of footsteps approached from outside the ward, and as I kept my head down, I saw Gu Huai entering with a doctor. I looked up at him and asked, "Where's Ruanqi?" Gu Huai's expression was not favorable, yet he answered, "The child has been sent home to be cared for by a nanny. The current concern is you. What could possibly be wrong with me?" I dismissed it nonchalantly. The next moment, I heard the doctor take a deep breath. I sat up straight. What did that mean? Was I terminally ill? The rustling of the medical records in the doctor's hands filled the air, and after a while, he spoke with a perplexed tone. "Ruan Lu, you have been marked for life." I blinked in astonishment. Even though I had not been in this world long, I was aware of the common knowledge. I laughed. "Doctor, there are no bite marks on my gland." The doctor replied, "Indeed, there are no bite marks, but our test results definitively indicate that you have been marked for life." I was taken aback. The doctor, seeming to wrestle with a complicated issue, asked, "Do you know who marked you for life?" I instinctively glanced at Gu Huai. Gu Huai, with an unfriendly expression, reminded me, "Ruan Lu, I have never marked you." Then who could it be? Apart from Gu Huai, I hadn't shared that kind of bond with anyone else. The ward fell into silence, broken only by the nurse's arrival. She held the test results and handed them to the doctor in front of me. The doctor examined the results, then looked at me and finally turned to Gu Huai, stating, "Mr. Gu, the person who marked Ruan Lu is you." Gu Huai furrowed his brow, taking the test results with disbelief, adamantly denying, "That's impossible. I have never marked him." I reminded Gu Huai, "It was clearly you who marked me. Otherwise, how would Ruanqi have come about?" The room fell silent once more. A rare look of confusion crossed Gu Huai's face as he muttered, "But why don't I remember?" He looked at me again, repeating, "I truly don't recall any of this." Gu Huai did not strike me as someone who would lie. If he said he didn't remember, he probably genuinely had no recollection. I suggested, "Are you really not going to do a paternity test with Ruanqi?" Gu Huai shook his head, saying, "No need, I trust you." After saying that, he turned to the doctor and calmly requested, "Doctor, please help me investigate why I have amnesia." 09. That evening, Gu Huai sat by my bedside, holding my hand with a mixture of regret and apology. "I truly cannot remember what happened that night. Could you tell me?" The first time Gu Huai and I met was on the very night I had just crossed over. At that time, I was burning with fever, believing I was ill, and collided with Gu Huai, who was similarly afflicted. He had asked me to help him procure suppressants, though I had no idea what they were. Ultimately, we ended up in a hotel together in a rather muddled manner. It was that simple. After listening to my account, Gu Huai remained silent for a long time, ultimately declaring that he still could not recall. I tentatively inquired, "What about the last time we were in the lounge? Do you remember that?" Gu Huai once again shook his head, replying, "The next morning, I found us lying in the same bed, and I thought it was your initiative." The situation had reached an impasse. The doctor informed me that due to the inability to find Gu Huai's bite marks on my gland, yet the existence of a lifelong mark, the procedure to cleanse the mark would likely necessitate the removal of the gland. I confirmed the surgical date for the cleansing procedure with the doctor. If I did not undergo the cleansing, I would have to rely on Gu Huai for the rest of my life, which left me feeling quite insecure. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. Having no further questions for the time being, I arranged for my discharge. Gu Huai drove me home, and just before I got out of the car, he handed me several vials of scent extraction fluid. Because of the lifelong mark, I would have an insatiable craving for his essence, and the extraction fluid could serve as a temporary substitute. He looked at me, hesitating to speak. "You really don't need to do this. I will always be here for you when you need me. We could remarry." I shook my head, "Let's not. If I were to remove the gland, it would be akin to erasing my identity in this world, the gender closest to my original self." During this time, Gu Huai sent someone every day with the scent extraction fluid. I would fall asleep each night leaning on his essence, my complexion improving, and I even gained a bit of weight. One day, the person delivering the extraction fluid was not Gu Huai's assistant, but rather Zhao Ran. He appeared somewhat anxious, and upon seeing me, he attempted to approach, but I evaded him. At this usual hour, he would typically begin to spout nonsensical declarations of love. But this time, he took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "Ruan Lu, could you come with me? My brother is in some trouble." Without even changing my clothes, I took Ruan Qi and got into the car. Gu Huai was lying in the hospital, and only his essence could offer him some comfort. However, Gu Huai was reluctant to trouble me. As the situation grew increasingly dire, Zhao Ran had no choice but to seek me out. When I arrived at the hospital, Gu Huai was already asleep. In just a few days he had lost considerable weight, forming a stark contrast to me. Ruan Qi in my arms was very well behaved. I carried him inside and sat in the chair beside Gu Huai's bed, using Ruan Qi's soft hand to gently touch Gu Huai's face. In a hushed voice, I taught Ruan Qi to speak. "This is Daddy." Ruan Qi's voice was muffled, only able to say Papa. I wanted to release my scent to soothe Gu Huai, but since I was still inexperienced, I accidentally released too much, causing Ruan Qi to fall asleep from the overwhelming scent. I placed Ruan Qi in the crib, leaning against Gu Huai's bedside, observing him intently. Perhaps he caught a whiff of the pheromone, for his brow finally relaxed a fraction. I reached out, gently brushing my fingers across his brow, then his nose and finally his lips. Gu Huai is undeniably handsome, and even in his current ailing state, his allure remains intact. I whispered softly, "Why haven't you awakened yet?" Of course, Gu Huai could not hear me. No, perhaps he could. I noticed his fingers twitch slightly, and his lips moved ever so faintly. Judging by the shape of his mouth, he might have been calling out Lele. I quickly pressed the call button. From that day forth, I brought Ruan Qi to the hospital daily, and within a few days he had learned to call me Daddy. Occasionally, Gu Huai would awaken, his frailty evident, yet he would still embrace Ruan Qi, displaying the limited fatherly affection he could muster. More often than not, he and I would sit together in silence, merely gazing at one another. He would sometimes tease Ruan Qi, coaxing him to call him Daddy. Ruan Qi, lacking in resolve, complied without hesitation. However, considering Gu Huai's current condition, I chose not to admonish him. At that moment, Gu Huai, seated on the hospital bed, fixed his gaze upon me and suddenly spoke. "Ruan Lu, I keep having these vague memories, as if I have known you before." Without a second thought, I replied, "Impossible, I've never met you."
"What ist?"
"I did not belong to this world previously. How could I possibly know him?" Gu Huai's words were interrupted by my response, and he paused, opting to change the subject instead. A faint smile graced his lips as he said, "I apologize for causing a delay in your surgery." The removal of the gland required Gu Huai's full presence and an adequate supply of pheromones, which he, in his current state, was unable to provide. After a moment's thought, I told him, "It's all right. We can discuss it once you are discharged." Gu Huai's gaze towards me grew increasingly peculiar. He affectionately called me Lele, and each time I visited him, he would attempt to offer me gifts, cars, houses, even checks. I felt a twinge of guilt and hesitated to accept, suspecting that, in his moments of confusion, he might have unwittingly signed those checks for me. On one occasion, while washing my face in the restroom, he stood at the doorway, gazing at me with an infatuated expression. Startled, I turned to him and complained, "Why do you have to scare me?" Gu Huai approached and gently brushed my damp hair aside. I felt a warmth rise in my cheeks as he scrutinized me from head to toe, imploring, "Can you refrain from cleansing the mark? I promise, this time I will treat you exceptionally well." "Lele, is that possible?" I gazed at him in silence, yearning to acquiesce, yet I hesitated, uncertain of the extent of Gu Huai's affections towards me. A lifelong mark is a serious commitment, and he did not believe Ruan Qi was his child. I could not gamble my future and Ruan Qi's on such uncertainty. My silence conveyed my answer, and he smiled bitterly, saying, "I'm sorry. I've arranged for my discharge tomorrow. Can we postpone your surgery until next month? On the day of the operation, I will accompany you." I consented, and in that moment, my heart felt as though it had plummeted, heavy with unease. The preparations for the gland surgery proceeded smoothly, yet throughout that month, Gu Huai did not seek me out. On the eve of the operation, Gu Huai invited me to dinner. He took me to a restaurant where, throughout the meal, his gaze repeatedly flitted over me. I sensed that he was reminiscing about someone. Setting down my chopsticks, I could not help but ask, "Is there something you wish to say?" Gu Huai, absorbed in his thoughts, momentarily paused, as if hesitating, before finally speaking. Having had a few drinks, his voice carried a lazy timbre. I once liked someone. I was not particularly interested in hearing about Gu Huai's romantic history, but he insisted on sharing. He fixed his gaze upon me, stating, he was someone quite special, unable to control his pheromones, looking at me with innocent eyes and asking what he should do. Gu Huai smiled softly, murmuring, just as you are adorable. He leaned closer, yet just before his hand could brush my face, he withdrew hastily. The distance between us seemed to shrink, and I almost anticipated a kiss. But soon he retreated. My heart raced as Gu Huai continued to reminisce. On the day he left, he professed his love for me, and then he simply vanished. Though I wished to refrain from dampening his spirits, I felt compelled to interject. He may have deceived you. Gu Huai chuckled lightly. He did not lie. He truly returned, but I made many mistakes and even forgot him. My heart soared and then sank. Initially, when Gu Huai spoke of his past love, I hoped it was me, yet I knew for certain that we had never met before. I did not belong to this world, nor was I his white moonlight. I was merely a pawn in his story. An inexplicable malaise settled within me, prompting me to remain silent. Regardless, I was about to undergo the gland removal. If he had his white moonlight, he could pursue her instead. Setting down my chopsticks, my voice quivering, I said, please take me home. I no longer wish to eat. The following morning, Gu Huai awaited me at the door, ready to take me to the hospital. The journey was silent, and just before we exited the car, he suddenly grasped the hem of my clothing. Confused, I turned back, and at that moment, an overwhelming sadness enveloped me. Gu Huai's eyes were slightly red as he once again uttered, I'm sorry. I awkwardly reassured him that it was nothing, asking, will you still accompany me inside? He affirmed that he would. He remained by my side throughout the examinations, ensuring that I was cleared for surgery. The operating room was stocked with Gu Huai's pheromone extraction fluid, essential for the soothing process during the gland operation. Due to the excess pheromones extracted during this period, Gu Huai's complexion had grown pale. Our eyes met briefly before I was wheeled into the operating room. At the moment I closed my eyes, fragments of memories that seemed alien yet oddly familiar flooded my mind. A 19-year-old Gu Huai, youthful and exuberant, kissed me tenderly, professing his love, gently calling me Lele. I embraced him tightly, lowering my head to expose my nape, saying, if you bite lightly, it shouldn't hurt so much. It turned out that I, too, had once lost a memory, just as Gu Huai had forgotten. This was not my first time traversing dimensions. Prior to this, I had indeed encountered Gu Huai. At 19, I had first entered his world, unable to control my pheromones, and had attracted the attention of several individuals. I had not fought them off. Gu Huai had saved me. He had been kind-hearted then, advising me to learn to protect myself, even taking me to a shop to buy inhibitors and gland patches. Tear the patch and place it on the gland, he instructed, handing me the patch. Noticing my somewhat brazen gaze, he became aware that this interaction had perhaps crossed the boundaries of social norms. His ears flushing red as he took a step back, saying, you should research basic physiological knowledge online. I nodded, holding the gland patch without using it, the peach aroma wafting toward Gu Huai, causing his face to redden as well. He opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to say something, but I interjected, could you lend me some money? Gu Huai handed me all the money he had on him. In those days, I was far bolder than I am now, unafraid of traversing a strange world, dining out with Gu Huai during the day and staying in hotels at night, funded by his generosity. I often teased Gu Huai, and even after mastering the art of controlling my pheromones, I still deliberately let some drift towards him. Unbeknownst to me, such behavior is fraught with peril. Had Gu Huai been a rogue, he would have marked me long ago. In this world, I experienced my first heat, feeling utterly distressed as I desperately released pheromones, all while seeking Gu Huai's assistance. He was gentle, continuously inquiring if I was all right. Unable to withstand the tension, I tugged at his collar, urging him to lean down, and I kissed him, tilting my head upwards. We were audacious, marking each other for life on our very first encounter. At that time, I had just turned 20, while Gu Huai was 20 years and 2 months old, precisely 1 year since we met. I had reconciled with the fact that I had transitioned into a different world. In my original world, my life was dismal, my adoptive parents having borne their own child. Therefore, I truly wished to be with Gu Huai for eternity. The day after our lifelong marking, I found myself back in my former reality. Perhaps this world had recognized my existence and forcibly returned me. My singular amnesia and Gu Huai's 3 instances of memory loss seemed to be the world's frantic attempt at restoration, or perhaps mere accidents. Regardless of how many times we lost our memories, Gu Huai and I remained together. As for why I returned once more, it might be attributed to the wish we made to be together forever, a desire that has materialized. As soon as my memories were restored, I sprang up and confronted the doctor, who was about to administer anesthesia, saying, "I'm sorry, but I will not proceed." Upon receiving the doctor's consent, I dashed out of the operating room. Gu Huai, taken aback, asked, "What is wrong? Is there an issue?" I threw myself into his embrace, holding him tightly, declaring, "I will not undergo the surgery." Gu Huai quickly responded, "All right, no surgery, we want to proceed." In the moments that followed, Gu Huai incessantly apologized on my behalf, saying, "I'm sorry for the trouble. I'll take him home now." The doctor seemed unconcerned, merely advising us to think carefully, as gland removal is no trifling matter. Nestled in Gu Huai's arms, my tears soaked his shirt as I looked up at him. Feeling aggrieved, I said, "Gu Huai, you have no idea how I managed all those years without you." Gu Huai paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Lele?" I responded with a soft raising my gaze to meet his. "I remember you. When did you regain your memories?" I inquired. Gu Huai held my hand gently, "A little before you. My memories started returning gradually during my last hospitalization. During those 2 sensitive periods, I could remember you, but once the heat ended, I would forget you again." "I'm sorry." Gu Huai was apologizing for his previous unrecognition. I patted his hand reassuringly, assuring him it was all right. It made sense now why he had affectionately called me Lele during that heat. He had remembered me then. A pang of bitterness washed over me, followed by the realization that even after Gu Huai regained his memories, he had not been entirely truthful with me, claiming to have a white moonlight, which had caused me considerable heartache. Unable to contain my frustration, I lamented, "Why didn't you tell me? If you had communicated with me, I wouldn't have considered this gland surgery." I couldn't fathom Gu Huai. If I truly underwent the procedure, the bond between us would dissipate. Gu Huai remained silent for a moment before lifting me into his arms, allowing me to sit in his lap. "I will not obstruct your choices. I am just grateful that I could find you again." Well, relying on Gu Huai's single-mindedness was less effective than voicing my feelings first. I kissed his lips, telling him, "Regardless of whether I possess my memories, I will always love you." "I will forever love Lele," he replied. Gu Huai and I remarried. The only obstacle to this news was Zhao Ran. Back when Gu Huai and I were dating, he was still in elementary school, having once been beaten by Gu Huai for aspiring to steal his brother's partner. Presently, he was both furious and dining. Just as he attempted to pick up a piece of meat with his chopsticks, it was snatched away by someone beside him. If memory serves me correctly, that individual was not a relative of Gu Huai's. Zhao Ran, exasperated, exclaimed, "What is so great about love? It's better to engage in entanglements. What do you think?" After a brief pause, Zhao Ran's face turned crimson. "You're insane." I turned back, exasperated, and remarked, "Gu Huai, your brother seems to have issues." Gu Huai, nonchalantly glancing over, took the opportunity to steal a kiss from me when no one was watching. I moved back into the villa with Ruan Qi, who was nearly a year old, wobbling as he walked and uttering simple words. He would affectionately call me Daddy and Gu Huai Papa. Occasionally, I would tease Gu Huai by pointing at him, encouraging Ruan Qi to speak. "Baby, call him uncle." Ruan Qi would respond with Su. Then Gu Huai would scoop both Ruan Qi and me into his embrace, pleading, "I was wrong, darling." I chuckled softly, pinching Ruan Qi's cheek. "All right, I'll forgive you this once." The end of the narrative. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and liking to support us. Until we meet again in the next story.